not many things that the state of Kentucky can actually brag about when it comes to national progress, when it comes to comparing and contrast how they measure up when it comes to the rest of the states in the country. Now, there are many things that Kentucky did really well on. In 1975, there was a judicial overhaul of the system, and Kentucky got a lot of praise for their judicial overhaul. So there is a lot of efficiency, and they are very good with the whole slaughterhouse of criminal justice. Now, the question matters, the question that is presented to us is whether or not our judges and prosecutors and our police force and our prison officials are actually, moral and not corrupt. If you have a very efficient system of, quote-unquote justice, and it's being run by about a bunch of corrupt people, Kentucky is number one for corruption. That Harvard study 2 years ago, we're number one in corruption, and the police is one area, then the transportation cabinet was another area. And so that's a huge deal. These judges are making $130,000. Are they actually imparting justice? Are they being leaders in their communities, or is the tail wagging the dog? And are the police officers going out bullying whoever the hell they want to bully, ticketing whoever they want to ticket, grabbing any poor and powerless person, dragging them to court, and then the court, slaughters them? It's essentially a slaughterhouse. But the way they streamlined the judicial system, and it was interesting how they did that in 1975. It was interesting how they did that, and also an interesting year, too. That was when all those white people in Louisville were rioting because they were pissed off that finally black and white students were going to be integrated with each other. And that Louisville had actually got complimented for our integration efforts. Oh, how wonderful our integration. It was nice and smooth, and it seemed like there was no issues whatsoever. Well, that's because there was only a few schools that were actually integrated. But 1975, you had all those, white racist, white supremacist riots. And they're waving Confederate flags, right, which is clearly, to anybody that's a thinking person, Confederate flag symbolizes racism, since it was all about slavery. And yes, you have a right to violently overthrow your slave master. Of course you do. Nat Turner is a hero. In spite of the horrible shit that he did, Nat Turner is a hero. It only makes sense that, do you want to live your life as a free person or a slave? Give me liberty or give me death, Patrick Henry supposedly had said, even though that's not true. So that's one thing that Kentucky led the nation on, the streamlined judicial system in 1975. The CARA in 1990, Kentucky Educational Reform Act. This is another thing. The two biggest things that I take away from CARA was computers. They integrated technology into the classrooms. And so I grew up with computers. Computers don't scare me like they do with the older generation. I believe I'm one of the oldest of the millennials, and those people who are older than me, they want to brag about it. Oh, I don't know anything about that there computer. Okay, so you're a dumb, ignorant piece of shit. You don't see the revolution. There was one anecdote where I was just at a cell phone store, and one lady said that she didn't understand all that Facebook and all that computer shit like what I just said. She says, I'm old school. Go ahead and text me. And then the lady responded with, well, texting isn't really old school now, is it? So you're using technology but pretending that you're old school. So I don't know what the appeal is of being old school. Let's be new school. Okay, so that's the 1990 CARA, the 1975 streamlined judicial system. We're also one of the first states to pick up on Common Core. So the Common Core of having math, social studies, English, science, that's a good thing, and it benchmarks us to competing states. And so, therefore, the competing states all across the country, that we can start to raise our rankings up because we got the test. We got a standardized test to see where we, stand around the nation. There's bigger issues. There's some issues that we need to address when it comes to public education. It's not liberating. The ACT scores when it comes to English, 50% aren't even meeting the benchmark goals, and then 60% of Kentucky students graduating aren't good enough when it comes to math. So those are some alarming statistics. And public education system, because of its love for hierarchy and tyranny, 100% compliance, shut up, sit down. They're not liberating anybody, and there's also no democratic practices. The teachers aren't engaged in democratic practices. The Board of Education is elected, and they select a superintendent, and then it's just hierarchy from there on. So the superintendent, then the principals, then the teachers, and then the students. And the students should actually be on top, and the parents aren't even in the picture. Parents, do you give a shit about your student? Do you give a shit about your children? So the 1990 CARE, Common Core, 1975, I'll say 2010 Common Core, 1975 Streamlined Judicial System, and Obamacare. Obamacare, we went from 20% uninsured rate to 7% uninsured rate. So we went from 1 out of 5 Kentuckians not having health insurance to less than 1 out of 10. It went down, 13%, and that's a remarkable success, and that's only from 2013 to 2015, so we don't even have the data for 2016 yet. So in 2 years, we more than cut the unemployed insured people of Kentucky in half. And we're one of the sickest states out there. So if you look at the rankings, we're high in corruption, poor in education, poor in health, and this is remarkable. This is something very good. Now, Matt Bevin is threatening to undo all of that progress, and I think that's very depressing. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to first talk about Chris Hedges. Okay, so essentially America is fucked. According to Chris Hedges, they are preparing, Homeland Security is preparing for the global catastrophe, for the climate change, and for economic collapse. So, if there's a big economic collapse, if there was an invasion, if there was something that pissed the people of America off and they went to the streets, well, the government and the powers that be are scared of this. In the name of law and order, they will sacrifice people's lives. They will sacrifice your rights. In the name of law and order, they will, do the most horrendous atrocities against the American people. Chris Hedges is saying we're fucked, and it's inevitable that we're fucked. Really, what needs to happen for the United States to be saved, we need a massive jobs program. We need public works. We need the banks to stop with the foreclosures, a moratorium on foreclosures. We need the student debt to be wiped out. And this is Jill Stein. Jill Stein is the only hope that America has. The only hope is Jill Stein. That's it. The Green Party candidate who's polling at pretty low numbers right now. And then we need investment in infrastructure, and we also need to pay attention to the people that are under 25. You have a poor class, but you also have a dangerous underclass, a proletariat, the lumpen proletariat. And so what's going to happen to them? 1 million poor people in Kentucky, and, there's a lot of issues that are happening, and if you have Mr. Shock Doctrine, Matt Bevin, and that's what I'm going to call him from here on out, Mr. Shock Doctrine. I called it, and it's going to happen. He's a capitalist. He's against the unions, and he wants to gut the unions out, even though it's only 7%. So he's going to bring in all these corporations, and they're going to exploit us as cheap labor. So we're going to get all these shitty corporations with these shitty jobs, and that's supposed to help us out. It's not going to help us out. It'll help the industrialist out. It'll help all Matt Bevin's business friends, all of his bloodsuckers, all of his bloodsucker friends out, but it won't help Kentuckians. What Kentuckians need are high-quality jobs, and Kentuckians also need a opportunity to start their own business, to stand up and to start their own business. So some seeding capital or some good jobs. So Mr. Shock Doctor Matt Bevin is going to make Kentucky's economy scream. But what the fuck does Matt Bevin give a shit? When he's making Kentucky's economy scream, well, you're going to have an increased militarized police force. You're going to have increased fascism. You're going to have people, when people are poor and then they finally lose their minds and they do something stupid, well, you need to make sure you crush that. You're going to have an increased war on drugs. So you're going to have an increase. The war on drugs is a miserable failure, but they don't give a shit. It empowers and it enriches the white-collared mafia. You have the, local political establishment. 120 counties, you got prosecutors, judges, and jailers, and mental health facilities, and there's, the public defenders. A lot of industry is dependent upon cops going out in this world fucking your life up for some dumb little shit, so that way the system can keep on going. The war on drugs is one of those big money makers. 75% of those in Kentucky prisons are there because of the war on drugs. And so that's going to be remarkable, because Kentucky's economy will scream, because they will squeeze Kentucky's economy. More poor people are going to hurt. They're going to use them for cheap labor. They're not thinking about liberating them. Capitalism actually is dependent upon poor people. You need to maintain a poor class, so that way somebody could do this shit labor for real cheap. And that's not the good business model. Denmark is able to provide good jobs and have a higher standard of living. They actually have an 80% tax rate, and they're the happiest country in the world, and businesses want to do business there because there's a high amount of educated workforce. There's plenty of educated people that can work in their companies, and then they also want to live in good areas. You know, industrialists and middle-class people want to live in nice areas. So, therefore, when you actually raise people up instead of pushing people down, this is good for business, this is good for people, and good for business. And so that's remarkable. That's what we need to do. And so, essentially, what Chris Hedges is saying, you know, when we have Mr. Shock Doctor Matt Bevin is going to squeeze Kentucky, it's going to make it worse. And then people are going to start breaking off, and it's going to be like Chile, 30 years of fascist dictatorship just to make sure that people get in line. If a couple people have to get shot, get killed, fall off of society, live in the woods, or, go homeless or get into poverty, well, c'est la vie. That's on them. Who gives a shit about them and their life? And that's very sad state of affairs. So, according to Chris Hedges, the only solution that we have in order to save ourselves is to do all the things that I just said. And since none of the politicians, since the system is against us, is against actually having these life-saving measures with the infrastructure, jobs program, moratorium on foreclosures, and then the wiping out of student debt, then we're fucked. America is fucked, and if America is fucked, then the poor states are going to be fucked even worse. And since we don't have a political system, a political establishment that will actually function for us, there's also bust and boom cycles. There was the Panic of 1873, Panic of 1879, something in 1906, and then the Great Depression. And it's like every 20 years, the capitalist class makes sure that we're doing okay for a minute, and then they crush us. And when they crush us, take a look at that housing crisis in 2008. What happened? For wealthy people that had money, that was good for them. Now all these poor people are kicked out of these houses, so you have all these empty houses, so the banks get to keep all this property, and then they sell that property to foreign interest people, the Donald Trumps of the world. So poor people get fucked with the housing crisis. Donald Trumps of the world who have money can come in and swoop in and buy your house out from underneath you. And then they can, maximize their profits by any means necessary. And so, the housing crisis is a good example of how the system, the boom and bust cycle, is bad for working class, middle, working, poor, and homeless classes of people, and good for the billionaire class. So Mr. Governor Shock Doctrine, Mr. Shock Doctrine Matt Bevin himself, he ran on a campaign of basically bigotry, hating gay folks, being pro-cockfighting. So, be happy, Kentucky. You can go around hating gay people and meanwhile, love it when cocks are fighting each other. Like, that's not gay, right? Watching cocks fight. And it's a joke, but he hates the unions, he hates the environment, he doesn't like childhood education, he's anti-Head Start, he is coming out against the health care. So that means that 500,000 Kentuckians are going to be thrown off the ranks. 500,000 Kentuckians are going to feel the pain, they're going to feel the shock doctrine, they're going to, Kissinger famously said about Chile when that democratic socialist was elected president, Salvador Allende in Chile, the United States went in there and assassinated their leader, and because they weren't capitalist. And Henry Kissinger said that he was going to make Chile's economy scream. That's shock doctrine of Naomi Klein, disaster politics. So that's what's happening to Kentucky right now. Only difference is we voted for it. I mean, 90% of Kentuckians didn't vote. An overwhelming amount of Kentuckians, they don't even participate in the political system. So none of these leaders have a democratic legitimacy. When you look at Edward Snowden, when you look at Julian Assange, when you look at Bradley Chelsea Manning, the good guys who stand up and do what's right and actually gives a shit about other people's humanity are punished, and meanwhile the bad men who go around hurting people, killing people, and without any type of emotion or empathy, they still have their jobs and they still get to continue on. The system is not sustainable. And unless we have these massive, jobs program, moratorium on foreclosures, student debt, that's going to be the next big bubble that's going to burst, and infrastructure, a massive investment in infrastructure, and then to make sure that the people under 25 are being taken care of. We have the largest amount of child poverty in the world. There's some big things that's going on. So Chris Hedges says the only solution that we have to this is massive demonstrations out in the street. So like the Velvet Revolution in the Czechoslovakia, and you had Egypt started out, with a good massive street demonstrations. They were able to kick out their, those leaders. That's not all we need, massive demonstrations that have an agenda directed at decision makers, and so that way we can force the decision makers to make proper decisions, which would be in Frankfurt, for Kentucky, be in Frankfurt, or it would be at your local courthouses, or we can have a plan to occupy the buildings, to take over the buildings, but then people might think that's a coup d'etat. But if it's a peaceful occupation, that one seems to be more dangerous, but he's saying that's the only solution that we have. The establishment was afraid of Occupy. The establishment tried to stop Occupy, and they did not like that Occupy had happened. So if there is a big economic collapse, the global crisis, the global warming crisis, is going to put a squeeze on a lot more people. The environment's going to go down. And if we had, say China gets pissed off at us, China's just joined into the Syrian war. So you got Russia in Syria, you got China in Syria, you got, and they were fighting for Assad and the state government, and then you have the United States and kind of Israel and the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia who are fighting and funding the rebels in Syria. This is looking like it's going to turn into a global war. Syria's been at war for 5, 6, 7 years, and this is just amazing. So if China wants to collect on their, we're indebted to China, so if we don't pay that back, Donald Trump is basically saying he's good with debt. And when we first started the United States, Alexander Hamilton didn't pay back the French. The French helped out the American revolutionaries, but as soon as the American revolutionaries got power, they said, well, we can't pay this debt back, so they just went ahead and zeroed out the books. And that helped. The French Revolution helped that out. So they didn't get the money. We didn't support the French revolutions. We supported the English, and then in the War of 1812, they're burning down our White House. Well, that's because we want to take Canada and kill Native Americans and shit, so we were kind of being war hawkish ourselves. But regardless, we should have allied ourselves with revolutionaries, with freedom fighters of the world. We should have been on the right side of history when it came to Haiti. We should have been on the right side of history when it came to France, and we were not. So anything short of massive demonstrations against your fascist, shock doctrine kind of dictators, monarchs. So we have a monarch right now, ruled by one. Matt Bevin controls and runs Kentucky. Now, who was he? He was a hedge fund manager. He worked in, investment banking. So he was one of the people that would buy your houses out, kick all the poor people out, and then he made lots of money, made buku bucks selling all, Kentucky down the river. He's not in favor of public schools. He's against Head Start. This is this does not give me any sort of confidence. There's three ways to have a revolution. You change the leadership, you change the Constitution, or you overthrow the system with violence. And those are the three ways you could change the system. So because of the streamlined judicial system, it was interesting how they actually enforced the 1975 streamlined judicial system and had to go by amendment because we couldn't write a new constitution. Our constitution is so fucked. There are so many contradictory laws that's on the books. For every one law in Kentucky, you can find another law that contradicts the other. And it's bloated, contradictory, but it's too hard to change. You have to first you have to get the public to vote for it once and then twice. And then after the public has voted for it, and that's only after you get the legislature to put it on the ballot. So the legislature has to put the Constitutional Convention on the ballot, and then it has to be twice approved by the population. So it's a very anti-revolutionary document. However, there is a Section 4 of Kentucky's Constitution which says that if Kentucky does not provide for our peace, safety, and happiness, then we have a right to overthrow the government. It's the right to revolution, and that comes straight from the American Revolution. So that's the Declaration of Independence. If the government is not, instituted by the consent of the masses, if our government isn't providing for our peace, safety, and happiness, then we have a right to change that government so that it is better. And that's what Chris Hedges, that's his main argument, is that we need to do that. So you have Chicago boys, you've seen this in Chile. So that's Matt Bevin. Matt Bevin is very much a shock doctrine guy. He follows the line of Milton Friedman and the Chicago boys. I guarantee it. I guarantee you that his economic policies strictly align with Milton Friedman and the Chicago boys, and that's austerity. That's the cutting of social programs. That's the selling out of Kentucky State's assets. And then once they, cut out social programs and sell our assets out to basically make government so little, and then it's all about the corporations, to make sure the corporations can function and to operate peacefully. And so you need a little bit of a judicial system so the corporations has a neutral body to be able to go to in order to resolve their disputes. But that's it. And so there's not too much more. You need the cops to make sure that the rabble doesn't stand up. When you think about the founding of America, Shays' Rebellion were the soldiers who stood up. The soldiers who stood up, who were getting their land taken from them because they, high taxes, they couldn't pay their, the land fees or what have you. But they fought the revolution over taxes. They fought the revolution. They put their lives on the line, and then the soldiers were being attacked. So the American Revolution was a revolutionary, definitely a war for independence, but it wasn't revolutionary. It defended the slave owners, it defended the plantations, and it defended the aristocracy, the ruling aristocracy. In fact, that's what James Madison famously said, that the point of the Constitution is for the opulent to be protected from the minority, or from the majority. So the majority landless people, well, we don't want the majority landless people voting us out and taking our wealth, so we need to set up this Byzantine system to make sure the masses stay in their place, and the wealthy people can maintain their slave owners, like George Washington, who had 318 slaves, and to kill Native Americans, to steal their land. So it was for the ruling elite. It wasn't for the people. Women didn't get a right to vote. Most blacks and Native Americans fought against George Washington, so Native Americans, blacks, were excluded in this so-called revolution. Women were excluded, so that's right there, that's more than 50% of the people. Even white males weren't even counted. If you owned land, you had a right to vote. Those are the only people that actually got the right to vote, were land-owning white males over 21 years of age. So if you're a white male who was under 21, or a white male who didn't own land, you weren't part of the democracy either. And so that's the system that we were created in. So we have all this reverence when it comes to the U.S. Constitution, but it has a 3/5 clause. It's got all these checks and balances, and essentially it's for the wealthy, it's for the bloodsuckers and the shock doctrine, Mr. Shock Doctrine, the oil barons and the bank barons and all the rest. And so that's what we're faced with here. So born in Denver, raised in New Hampshire. I don't know. So that's it. There's not much hope except for public massive demonstrations. And if you stand up and you fight, you might lose. But if you don't stand up and fight, then you've lost already. If you don't get into the political system, then you're letting other people run it. So you exiting from the system doesn't do anybody any good. And I think that's a goddamn shame. So.